The County School Board will be meeting this afternoon at 5:30 to discuss the concept of the Supermax school. That is to say, the school that more closely resembles the prison so that its inmates might be kept secure, not locked in so much. No one really wants to get out of a public school. Everyone would love to stay there, but to keep outsiders from coming in and wreaking havoc by semi-automatic rifle, semi-automatic pistol or revolver or other mechanisms upon the victims, the intended victims of the mass shooter. We have a mass shooter stalking students in Hamilton County, or so our officials believe. And because that young man is already here, he's already here and making his plans, the system is trying to gear up for his assault. It is viewed as a threat, the threat of a massacre in Hamilton County. And the administration of the school system in the county will be hearing from Sheriff Jim Hammond and perhaps others on things that can be done to increase the number of school resource officers, SROs, in the school. There are 29 schools have these deputies there. Deputies, his original mission is servicing the sheriff to defend the court. That's what deputies exist for. Deputies have a common law origin. The sheriff has a common law, even a biblical origin, and that is maintaining the authority of the court, the judge or the judges who are the state, right? The judge representing the justice that God requires be in society, the harsh mechanism that has to be there on account of the fall of man in Adam. So God ordaining there be judges to wield the sword against malefactors within the society and without. That would be within would be criminals, private criminals, and without would be invading Amalekites, Philistines, Soviets, or what have you. Those are the external threats that the judge in God's plan for humankind deal with. This is David Tulis, and if the danger is so great in Hamilton County of a massacre that there have to be drills, there have to be protocols in place in detail for lockdowns, for searches, for seizures, for warrantless prying upon people's property, then we have to ask ourselves, why are we so dedicated to the concept of the public school, as it's called here around the public school? If our dedication to the public school is so great, how is it so great? What is the foundation of that greatness that keeps it aloft and makes the public school more important than the lethal threat that is being envisioned, and for which preparations today here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County are being made to defend the student body from the armed assailant, from the gunman. And the dream, of course, in that once you take on the idea that schools are essential, as might be the court, right? That we have to convert schools into supermax schools, as they have in Texas. George W. Bush, the progressive statist liberal who eventually became president as a Republican, the Republicans are the socialist party to the right, has to his credit developed in Texas in the 1990s when he was governor there, that the concept of the Supermax school. And that came about according to Alex Vitale in his important book, The End of Policing, in his chapter on the school to prison pipeline. The Supermax school was that which students were sent to when they had violated enough codes and rules, talked back enough times, not been in the proper place at the right times, or been out of surveillance too long a period, perhaps. They were sent to what Annette Fuentes calls Supermax schools. These are military bases. These are like prisons, designed to keep the inmates secure, right? Security being the mantra. As we now, not having any confidence in God anymore, we live in fear. We live in fear, and fear in Hamilton County Chattanooga, and places beyond, right? Many places beyond, having converted fear into an idol, the one we worship, the one to whom we bow down. All other considerations now being laid aside. If only there were enough money, right? If only we had enough Federal Reserve notes in our account in digital form to pay for a cop in every school, or a deputy in every school, that have fingerprint scanners, metal detectors, frequent searches, heavy video surveillance, and in the free state of Texas, intense disciplinary systems to manage children kicked out of regular schools. In cases in that state, you can't talk in the hallways, right? You can't be somewhere without a permit. You can't travel from one part of the complex, one part of the compound, to the other without permission. Teachers, Vitale says, have very little specialized training, and the low pay means fewer certified teachers than in regular schools in the Supermax system in Texas. Prison-like conditions, terrible performance. But it's called the Texas Miracle, and that's how Republican establishment will frame anything that is a progressive solution, right? Your progressive statist Republicans, perhaps even worse than Democrats, right? They are the party of the hypocrites, even worse. So that's coming later today. Sheriff Hammond will be making a discussion about how to secure the factory school system, the factory school that has long been intended to deprive individual young men and women, and of course many boys and girls. These schools are a place where held hostage within them under the compulsory attendance statute are men and women. These aren't just children, right? Many of them are old enough to make love and have children, right? Many are old enough to make love and be married and start families. And of course, in the same schools, in the lower grades, are pure children who have not become men and women. You become a man when you're 14, and you become a woman at 13 or 14. And so, the prospect of conception requires respect. But we Americans, having developed back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, we have developed a whole new thing unknown to mankind previous to our arrival on the scene. We've created a thing called adolescence, a status of prolonged childhood between adulthood and childhood. And so these schools have retarded adults in them, retarded by the system itself. The system is designed to make them weak, to make them dependent. Now, there's a poll out, a survey out by Monmouth University, picked up, I think, on TV9, by TV9's website. The website, by the way, TV9 may be the leading station in Chattanooga, but its website is an abomination. It is the worst website. It is just absolutely horrible. I get up in the morning early, well before you do, my listener, and I'm there to prepare what we're going to discuss today, what I think would be of interest to you, or what would be of value to you. And I sometimes just evade going to TV9's website to see what it has, because it's just so difficult to read that website. It's such a mess, just an awful, awful mess of a website. TV9 should do something about it if it wants to maintain its lead in the TV market. But nonetheless, it has rightly decided to put out there a story from Sinclair News Service, and it makes reference to a poll by Monmouth University about the deep state. Do Americans believe there is a deep state? Well, yes, more than half of the people in the survey believe that there is a deep state, and that national policy is manipulated and affected by it. Again, that comprising largely of unelected officials, right? You don't have to be elected to have say in this country, and there are many other parties that are connected to the deep state, some further out from the center, obviously, than others, and they are just the profiteers. That would be the cartelists, the for-profit corporations, the nonprofits, you might say the charity capitalists, right? The capitalists involved through the charitable sector of the Internal Revenue Code, making their millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in nonprofit activity. They are all part of it as well. But the the story is that over half of the public believes that they're either very worried at 21% or somewhat worried 30% about the U.S. government monitoring their activities and invading their privacy. There's also no significant partisan difference in that. 57% of independents, 51% of Republicans, and 50% of Democrats are at least somewhat worried about the federal government monitoring, again, through the deep state, their activities. Another 24% of the American public not too worried, and another 22% not worried at all. Those are the people who, of course, watch TV and get their learning from television. Patrick Murray is the director of the Polling Institute. He says, this is a worrisome finding. The strength of our government, he says, relies on public faith in protecting our freedoms, which is not particularly robust. And it's not a Democratic Republican issue. These concerns span the political system. Few Americans say government monitoring is on American citizens is justified, but most 53 saying it's sometimes justified. Well, the question is not justified, is whether it's legal, right? It's always justified if someone gives a reason, right? Justified means justification, reason given for, right? That's what that means. It's not, the question is not, is it justified? Is it defended or defensible? It is whether it is legal. We're talking here about the rights of the people and the limited authority, the limited power of the national government and state governments to do what they will, use their own power, arrogate power that they don't have. Much of government activity, I would like to suggest, is illegal. And that is to say, it's outside of explicit authority. There's just one more detail. Minorities are more correct than whites on this point, according to the survey. They are more suspicious of the national government's spying and surveilling them, more likely to believe that there is a deep state that is again it's a nonpartisan deep state. It doesn't really care who's in charge. It doesn't really care whether there's a Trump or an Obama in the chair of the chief executive. It is indifferent to that. Those figures come and go, but what they have, or what we have, they would say, is national security at interest, and of course their own prosperity, the necessity of their own work being always brought to the front. We need to have more funding for it. We need to have more to do, and we need to reach out further beyond the national boundaries to make sure that our country is secure, right? Because at every point you can reach, you can be funding a rebel group in Mindanao fighting the Muslims, right? Perhaps, and that somehow comes back to your nonprofit organization having a concern about American security, right? Or American well-being. You can justify all these things, reaching out many layers, many concentric circles out beyond your office outside of Washington, and it's all good, right? You're all good because you are looking out for the so-called national interest. There is a deep state in Tennessee, and that's something that we've given quite a bit of attention to. And my project of racial reconciliation is working against that. And I know that I've read about journalists who are slain for exposing the CIA's connection to the drug trafficking business back in the 1980s. There have been numerous journalists. The man who started Breitbart killed by a car bomb. And there are many people like that who ended up being stricken by poison or bombs or have bizarre traffic accidents for exposing the work of these good people. Right? I call them the good people because I don't want you to hate them. I want you to understand that they are there by God's providence. Now, I know that a lot of churchgoers would say, "Oh, yeah, David knows about Romans 13," because in their mind, Romans 13 is the justification for tyranny and despotism. All tyranny and despotism is put there by God, they say, and so there's nothing we can say and do about it. We just have to submit. Right? That's the normal narrative out of the standard Christian reading of that passage, which of course is erroneous. It is an erroneous teaching, widespread in Christendom, no doubt in the Chattanooga area. The teaching of Romans 13 is effectively that there is a judiciary government. Government is by a judiciary, and there are no other branches, right? That's because the idea of there being three branches borrows from concerns within Christianity about the fall and the need to have countervailing points of power and authority within a government, right? That's why Montesquieu and the conservatives, French philosophers, the rationalists, came up with the idea of, well, let's have a legislative branch, a judicial branch, and an executive branch, and they'll all sort of compete for power, and they'll all regulate the activity of each of the other. And so that way we can have an expansive humanistic state. We can have a messianic state, God walking on the earth, if we can appeal to conservatives who are very suspicious, people in the church, very suspicious of these of gaining power. We can appeal to them by saying, well, this power is self-limiting because look, we have the three branches, and that's what we have in this country. And look what the theory of Alexander Hamilton has finally ended up giving us. It has given us a unitary, monolithic national state, a warfare, welfare, surveillance state that has listening ears good enough to catch the Texas pipe bomber using his cell phone, which he turned on when he probably should have had turned off, or should have driven over the thing with his car wheel to crush it. But he turned it on at some point. And that's how they found out where he was. They gathered through surveillance of your cell phone and everybody else's. They gathered which cell phones were near the area where the detonations took place, and that is how sifting people like your number and coming up with a consensus among the numbers, sifting the data, finding, well, here's the number that keeps popping up. To whom does it belong, and can we find out more about this person? Well, this is David Tulis, and we are at New York Radio 92.7. There is there's so many directions we could go, but I'll tell you what, this show is in my hands. Okay, David Tulis, your mild-mannered editor, host, the editor of yournews.com, Your News Know Everything, brought to you by Nooga Radio, News and Talk 92.7 FM, and also 95.3 FM HD4 high definition. Brought to you by yournews.com. If you're in the Chattanooga area, just type that in, and your URL will tell the platform your rough location. And if you're proximate to me, proximate to my very warm microphone, you will end up on my site. Now, there's a national site. And if you go down to the bottom, there's the local stories, but you can also just shortcut the national material and the international material and go to the local page. And there you'll find a kind of new version of Nooganomics.com. Nooganomics.com, our sponsor. Now, I had this morning, I was reading in Jeremiah 13. I'm promising myself to get through the book of Jeremiah, and I confess that I've not been submitting myself to the word to be reshaped by it like I need to be as a sinner. But I'm today I did do a chapter in Jeremiah, and I'm doing that because I want to see what my job is as you can say a prophetic ministry. Every member of the press is effectively a kind of prophetic ministry, and that's his job. If you're a TV station, a radio station, if you're a newspaper, you are to be the prophet. You are to see more deeply than other people. You are to shed light on darkness. You are to expose abusive TBI practices, right? The false arrest and evasion. In fact, there's a grand jury indictment in Tennessee of two Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents, Mark Reynolds and Jeff Jackson, who barged into a house without a warrant and harassed the owner. They've been indicted in the furthest corner of Tennessee away from us, in the northwest corner of Tennessee. I guess that would be west of Clarksville, the military base up there, a case there. So the job of the press, there is a very good story by Rachel Townsend at stategazette.com that covers that. The press is supposed to show the light. And who is the press? Well, the press, again, shows light, but here's a way of figuring how to become a leader, okay? The leader is the man who's read one book more than the next person, okay? That's the leader. And the prophet is the man who's read 5 books more. Now, I I may have read 5 books more than you, and I don't know that I'm a prophet, but there is still, by the obligation of the press, a kind of prophetic role. It is a role like that of the minister, right? The minister on the Lord's Day, expounding in a ministerial fashion the Word of God. In other words, he's reading the law. He is ministerially, without having any discretion, ministering the Word to the people. And hopefully that minister has read 5 books more than you, and I hope more than 5 books than me, because his calling is greater than mine. But still, we share in that duty, the calling out of falsehood, error, and lies. And the press is full of lies, but it also shows how the good people, our saviors in the state, are lying left and right. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news talk leader, Nooga Radio, Digital FM